I'm Billy S, welcome back to the channel. It's the end of 2024, and for quite a few years now, I've had a tradition on this channel where I talk about all the games I've played throughout the year. And this doesn't just mean games from 2024, games I played for the first time this year also get a spotlight, because as I've gotten older, my focus has shifted from keeping up with new releases to instead going back to what we've left behind. There's a massive backlog of games just waiting to be unearthed, and this year was no different. I also played a lot more indie games, trying to support developers during the tumultuous events that racked the gaming industry. How about we leave the layoffs of 2023 and 2024 in 2024? I'll go month by month, I'll touch on a ton of different games, and then at the end of the video, I'll give you my top 5 games of the year. So let's jump in, my gaming journey of 2024. Let me know your gaming experiences from this year down below. This isn't 2024. To put it bluntly, during the holidays of 2023, there were a couple games I played after I'd already edited my last gaming journey video. As such, I want to shout them out here. They're all indie titles, with the first being The Messenger, an action platformer by Sabotage Studio with some of the most banging music I have ever heard in a video game. I really enjoyed the game's snappy writing and interesting environments to explore. Each level had something new to bring to the table, and you really got a sense that you knew the island this game was focused on like the back of your hand on that journey eastward. So when it's revealed that the game is actually a secret Metroidvania, my mind was blown. Really great combat, characters were super enjoyable, I even played the DLC and had a lot of fun in its tropical island setting, and some of those boss fights were genuinely quite difficult, which for my channel is a good thing. I followed that up with Sabotage Studios' more recent game, Sea of Stars, an RPG inspired by the likes of Chrono Trigger that I'd played the demo for earlier in 2023 and I'd really vibed with. It's a simple game featuring a small cast of characters with very simple movesets that didn't feel like they had a lot of depth. I was still using the same spells at the end of the game that I had at the start. What made the fights fun was the lock system. You had to do specific types of damage to break locks around enemies, which would weaken their upcoming attacks, or better yet, stop them entirely. While the game was fun, it lacked a lot of the snappy writing that came with The Messenger, alongside a surprising amount of grammatical errors. The story tries to tie into the prior game with a shared universe deal, but it just doesn't land for me. It's a shame because the presentation and the music and the concepts are there. I just don't think they nailed it with their gameplay or their writing. Also, the path to the true ending is a thing. You have to do a lot of busy work for what feels like a real ass pull of a moment. I kinda wish the devs had the guts to stick to a certain story beat, but I'm getting ahead of myself. If you like RPGs, it is a good game, just for me it wasn't a great game. As it turns out, the game I was most infatuated with this month wasn't even one I played personally. My partner Ion bought a game called In Stars and Time, and I was visiting him for the holidays, so I got to watch him play it in full. It's an indie title that focuses on the lives of 5 different characters at the end of their quest. They're about to march on the stronghold of the King, a man who wishes to freeze the country of Vogard in time. You wake up in a field of flowers, playing as Sifrin, the party's rogue, and everything is going well. The characters bond over their shared experiences. You really feel like this group knows each other by now, even if you, the player, are just catching them at the end of their journey. You enter the final dungeon, you clear the area of deadly traps, and then you wake up in a field of flowers. In Stars and Time is the best time loop story I have ever had the pleasure of experiencing, and it's tied together with a really fascinating game that rewards the player for their curiosity. How can you make this loop different? Can you change events? Does your character react differently now they have knowledge they shouldn't have? All wrapped in with an interesting battle system that takes rock, paper, scissors to its ultimate extreme. It's also an inclusive game with some brilliantly written representation in the form of multiple queer characters, but what I love is how none of it is presented in a tokenized or sexual way. I'd love to go into more detail on that aspect, but I know it's not what everyone's here to see. I just really love when characters are well written and more than just a couple bullet points for their personalities. In Stars and Time is magical, one of the best games of 2023, basically one of the best games of 2024, it came out so late, and if you like Amori or Earthbound or Undertale, you will enjoy In Stars and Time. January is going to be a short entry on today's video because this was the same month where I had to do a cross-country move, over 700 kilometers to get where I wanted to go. As such, I just didn't have time to play games. I tried Void Stranger after a recommendation by a YouTube video, and really tried to get into the Sokoban puzzle nature of the game. I was intrigued by the meta story that was slowly forming on the edges of each bit of gameplay, wanting to know more about the character I was playing as well as this princess I kept seeing in flashbacks. However, the gameplay just failed to click with me long term. I ended up needing to Google solutions to puzzles that had me far too stumped for far too long, and ultimately I dropped the game when I realized I just wasn't enjoying myself. It's a really good game, but you have to enjoy Sokoban puzzles, otherwise I think you'd be better watching a YouTube playthrough instead. Mario + Rabbids Sparks of Hope was another game I played in January. I needed something on my Switch while I was traveling, and I'd played the original Mario + Rabbids the year before and really enjoyed it. Even made a review of it on this channel, remember when I did those? I really loved the freedom of the sequel, as you were able to move freely across the battlefield now instead of being constrained to a grid-like system. And the addition of the various sparks that elevated the gameplay by giving each character a special ability to break out led to a lot of fun customization. I do think it suffers greatly from general Ubisoft poor UI. Skill trees were a pain to navigate to, and a lot of the pop-up tutorials were incredibly cheap, like something you'd see in a low-budget mobile game, complete with a random render of a character. It felt very lifeless, and that's something that just seems to be a thing with Ubisoft. I also started the DLCs, but kind of bounced off of them after realizing, I wanted to play something else. Not a lot of PC gaming this month, as when my PC arrived in my new city, I had to buy a new graphics card as the oldest one didn't survive the journey. To be honest, my PC is showing signs of age, and I think 2025 might be the time for an upgrade, assuming this channel continues to grow. I also picked up 13 Sentinels, Aegis Rim, which I did start playing, and I really enjoyed what I saw. I've heard the story is one of the best in gaming, and I really love the art style, and the fact that you can flip between protagonists to follow everybody's individual narrative. It's very visual novel, but then suddenly you're playing a mech-based tactics game that is very nerve-wracking. Admittedly, that part of the game was far less interesting to me. I wanted to see more of the characters, and this is a game I barely started, but I need to go back to at some point in 2025. There's actually a YouTuber many of you might know, Daryl Talks Games, who's been trying for years to do a special backlog project. I've actually tried it myself, it's hard, but I think I'm gonna follow his 2025 example and see if we can get somewhere, so I'll keep you posted on that. There was one other game that came out in January, Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, that I really wanted to play, but I just couldn't justify the purchase at the time, and I didn't get to play it until December 2024, so you'll be hearing more from it at the end of this video. February, the shortest month in the year. We started it off with an indie game that recently got an update, Slay the Princess. My partner Ion was adamant that I give the game a go, and we had a really good time. It's a visual novel that follows the story of a man who needs to slay a princess, and the many choices you can make on that path. Depending on what you do, things change, and as you complete specific runs, you can replay the game, but you'll find the options you took before vanished. You meet various different iterations of the princess, all in this gorgeous hand-drawn art style, and everything is voice acted brilliantly to boot. The talent on display here was nothing short of extraordinary. I just played the game a little too early into the year to benefit from the updated release a few months ago. Another game I bought through the hype was Penny's Big Breakaway. I was intrigued because the game was being developed by the people who worked on Sonic Mania, and that's exciting. But I bounced off of this title incredibly quickly. I don't think I spent more than a night playing around with the game. I found Penny very difficult to initially control, which is normal in a 3D platformer, I'm not denying that, but there was a lack of overall polish in the game's presentation, and I found myself clipping through geometry in the opening levels multiple times. It felt like it needed another month in the oven. It's a game I know is insane for speedrunning, and I do want to try it again at some point, I just need to be in the right headspace. It's a shame because I really love the visual style and the music, the ambiance, and just the idea of using a yo-yo for a 3D platformer. I also this month got my partner to play Xenoblade Chronicles 2 for the first time. He watched me stream the original game years and years ago, and I really wanted to get him into the third game in the series, but I knew my duties. You can't throw someone into Xenoblade 3 without any context, so I had him play 2 first. It was an interesting experience for both of us, as I hadn't played the game in many years, and I do think on a replay that certain aspects stick out like a sore thumb. The voice direction doesn't always match the scenes, the slapstick nature and anime tropes really got old, and the tutorials are god-awful. But the Xenoblade charm is still there. You've got great character designs, a very well-told story, and once the battle system clicks, it's a lot of fun. If you can ignore the gacha elements that heavily determine how well your blades and their different elements fare, you can have fun. I didn't remember how atrocious the enemy placements were in the game though, and they are bad. More Ardain, where you're practically being forced to run through a field of level 80 plus enemies to reach the hidden factory, as the area design feels deliberately obtuse when figuring out where to go next. And what about Crucible Spirit Elpis, which was almost the end of the game for my partner, as he got so sick of the constant fights that would come out of nowhere, the forced fall damage segments that would often lead to unique monsters on the main path, and the fact that your characters were in a weaker state due to plot reasons, leading to one of the worst boss fights in the series. It's a real shame because it muted his reaction to Nia's big story moment at the end of the chapter. And guess who had to step in to defeat the final boss of the game? Yeah, after 5 or so deaths to the final boss, which to Ion felt really brutal and unfair, I stepped in with my knowledge of the combo system and finished the game for him at his request. Ironically, my boyfriend Ion couldn't beat Xenoblade 2's Ion, the final boss that conveniently has the same nickname as him. That's so funny. I was convinced he hated Xenoblade 2, I won't lie to you all, but he did assure me he had fun, and while it's not a game he would personally revisit, he did end up caring about the characters. All of this to say, he knew who Nia was, and that's all I set out to achieve. I think Xenoblade 2 is just a really hard sell unless you're into these types of games to begin with. Xenoblade 3 on the other hand, we'll get to that a little later. For March 2024, I didn't end up playing any new releases. None of the games that came out that month particularly interested me at the time, so I put a little more focus into the videos for the channel and games I wanted to cover. On the Nintendo side of things, I recorded the footage for The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time and The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask via the Nintendo Switch online app. Both games excel in different areas, with Ocarina of Time setting the blueprint that 3D Zelda followed for the next 2 decades, until Breath of the Wild broke that mold. Elemental temples, a sprawling open world you could explore upon horseback, a check-in with each of the different races across Hyrule. So many series staples appear here, like the Gorons, the Gerudo, and the new designs for the Zora. We get classic music motifs like Zelda's Lullaby, Song of Storms, Hyrule Field. We get access to all of Link's new tools in a 3D space, and I cannot begin to fathom how mind-blowing this technology was in the 90s that we had a game where you could lock on to the enemies you're fighting. Z-targeting is the grandfather of the modern-day lock-on, and it still works to this day. That's not to say Ocarina of Time doesn't have a bit of jank, but even then it was mostly fixed in the 3DS version. Had I the ability to record from my 3DS, trust me, I'd be covering that version instead. It's not my favorite Zelda game because due to it setting the blueprint, it ends up being the most cookie-cutter experience of them all, but it is a masterpiece. Majora's Mask, meanwhile, was a game I was really afraid to revisit. I have long held it as my favorite Zelda game and one of my favorite games of all time. Would I still enjoy it in 2024? Is it gonna hold up, or am I in for a rude awakening? And as it turns out, it's a bit of both. On the one hand, I still think Majora's Mask has one of the best atmospheres in any Zelda game. The cheerful, on-the-surface land of Termina is home to a series of incredibly dark concepts that I'm shocked made it into the final game. It's a story about dealing with death, regrets, the inevitable passage of time, and how the people of Termina handle their grief. Some of the side quests are a tad uninteresting, as you'd expect from a game chock full of them, but the ones that do hit are insanely well designed, Anju and Cafe being the prime example. The dungeons are fantastic, with really great theming and some really solid level designs. While Woodfall is a very standard first dungeon, from Snowhead onwards, the length of each complex feels extended beyond the usual Zelda fare, and I still attest that Stone Tower Temple is a masterclass in dungeon puzzle design. But something felt a little off to me in this playthrough. I began to notice parts of the game that really felt like they dragged on, specifically the Great Bay. The quest to collect the Zora eggs was so much more tedious than I remembered. You need to ensure you have as many bottles as possible to carry them from the pirate fortress, which means if you don't, you have to leave and re-enter that mini-dungeon multiple times. There's the Lost Woods-style underwater path to the far-out reef that feels really out of place and a little uninspired, I don't know. I just found this part of the game to really drag. I love the Great Bay Temple though, y'all can fight me on that one. Link's transformations all still feel as fresh and exciting as they did all those years ago, and I got the better version of them due to playing the original N64 and not the remake, which made some baffling changes to so much of what made this version of the game so fun. Zora swimming, Deku Link momentum. While I still adore Majora's Mask, and there are so many standout moments, I realized with this replay that it is not the fully cohesive package I once thought it was, and I think I'm ready to admit that it is no longer my favorite Zelda title. Lastly this month, I played Armored Core 6: Fires of Rubicon, my first foray into FromSoft's mech series, and if you're curious about my thoughts, I made 3 videos on the game earlier this year, all of which I am very proud of. I don't like mecha, it's not something I was ever interested in, yet Armored Core 6 focused less on the mechs themselves, and more on the personalities inside them, on the intergalactic political story that was being set up on Rubicon. I really enjoyed getting to know my handler and his allies, or those of the Rubicon Liberation Front, the calm collected All Mind who rewards us with perks for completing missions, and the few rivals who show up time and time again to bother you, Iguazu. The missions are short and sweet, bite-sized journeys with very specific objectives that can range from reaching the end of a level, destroying specific enemies on a field, or scanning wreckages for information. Some of the missions are pretty chill, designed to tide you over till the next big story sequence, yet even they can sometimes hide fun challenges. The combat in Armored Core 6 took a long time for me to get used to, not gonna lie. Having so many different weapons at my disposal and so many buttons to keep track of, all the while needing to create builds that catered to the missions I was on, it kept me engaged with the systems I was presented with, but it was a very, very time-consuming process. Some of the boss fights in this title rival those of FromSoft's best, from the first Balteus you take down all the way to some of those final in-game fights. There's a true sense of weight and gravitas to a lot of these. There are 3 different paths to take as well, which you can do rather easily following each new game cycle, and each offers a different series of extra missions and final bosses to take down. There's so much replayability here, and I'm honestly sold on the Armored Core series now. Whether I go back and try the older titles, or I choose to wait for the inevitable Armored Core 7, I'm glad I've gotten over my disdain for mecha to give this game a try. April was another quiet month for me. In terms of big game releases, Stellar Blade was the only one I recall, and I didn't have a PS5, so I focused instead on the indie scene. Pepper Grinder was a short but sweet platforming game where you take control of a girl with a massive drill. You use it to shoot through the landscape, drilling through the earth as you attempt to build momentum and make your way across the 4 different worlds the game presented. This is one of those platformers that's all about the flow. Your first run through a level will be testing the waters, looking for those extra bonus coins and figuring out what the new mechanics are. Be they switches that open and close doors, attaching a gun to your drill to attack enemies, or avoiding environmental hazards. Your second run through a level is all about getting the fastest time, speedrunning your way from checkpoint to checkpoint while trying to keep your momentum for as long as possible. It's an addictive feeling when you manage to chain together enough movement to make your way to the end of the level that previously left you struggling, and that is where Pepper Grinder excels. It's a game that needed 1 or 2 more worlds though, as it ends a little too soon for my tastes. I wanted to see the drill taken even further. But that might just be the Celeste effect, where you want to see platforming mechanics taken to their absolute limits, and not every developer is capable of pulling that off. The other game I played this month was a big one for the channel and the Souls community, Another Crab's Treasure. The Crab Souls-like, where you explore the ocean floor through crumbling sandcastle ruins, a murky kelp forest, a polluted electrical plant, and so much more. It's a game that balances the combat and mechanics of a Souls-like with the bouncy and bright nature of a SpongeBob PS2 platformer, creating a blend that works shockingly well. The star of the show is the Shell system. You can equip a massive host of different spells to Krill, your protagonist, and they each have their own health bars and special effects. Elemental attacks, ink blots to stealth away, sturdiness abilities so they can withstand special hits, healing with sushi. It was all genius. And with a shell insurance store in the main hub, you could take your favorite shells with you anytime you respawned. The combat itself is also really clean. There's a grapple you get early on that provides great movement tools, a parry involving your shell that applies a risk-reward system, as failing to get the timing right would mean immense damage to your shell. There were special abilities that could change the flow of the fight, many of which I chose not to use because some of them were a tad overpowered, and I have to shout out the boss fights, which were numerous and well designed. None of the bosses felt particularly unfair, with a lot of them having great gravitas and some fun mechanics that made them feel unique. Starting off with Magister, Duchess of Slacktide, was already a high bar, but they kept raising it and raising it with so many fun ideas. You ever want to fight a pill bug on a pinball table? Or an electric eel with a vibrator? Or go toe-to-toe with a mantis shrimp who also doubles as a trainer for Krill to upgrade his skills? This is the game for you. Also, the game coconut mauls you with an in-game QR code, and I just think that is mwah, chef's kiss. May, the month where the gaming industry went to absolute shit, leading to the meteoric rise in indie games. This was when the Twitter trend happened where indie developers would start reposting their games en masse, and thank God, because a lot of the games I played this month came from this trend. Animal Well is a game that needs no introduction, a Metroidvania with a focus on minimalist hand-holding as you're dropped into a gorgeous pixel series of caverns with no guide on where to go or what your objective is. You have to collect items, use them to solve various puzzles in their area, and then take those abilities to other areas to solve even more puzzles, and then discover even more puzzles on top of those that require some of the most outside-the-box solutions I have ever seen. I won't lie, it is criminal that Animal Well didn't take home anything at the Game Awards this year. It fully deserved to be focused more based on the way it gripped the indie community at launch. But it's not really a game of the year for me, because I think a lot of what made Animal Well so compelling was the community aspect of the game. There were secrets upon secrets to find, like peeling back the layers of an onion, but by the time I started playing the game myself, most of those secrets had already been figured out and solved. I still got to enjoy my first run of the game and the ability to initially win, yet when a game's focus is on a community solving a series of ever deeper clues, you end up missing out on that extra enjoyment when the work's already been done for you. It's not a knock against the game itself, but more so an explanation for why I bounced off of Animal Well after my first finished run, despite it being a really intriguing experience. Sticky Business was my next indie game I gave a shot. I saw it during the Indie World presentation in April and thought, aw, that looks cute. You create your own sticker business, selling the most adorable little stickers for your clients, while slowly unraveling stories about your regulars. I mostly played this game while on the go, as it lended itself to times where I'd be at a friend's place for a Dungeons & Dragons session, but we would have an extra hour before everyone arrived. It's not a game I intended to finish per se, but a game I just keep installed on my Switch in case I ever feel like making some cute stickers on a rainy day. Crow Country was another May release that I was extremely excited for. I recalled seeing trailers for the game earlier in the year, and given my partner and I are both fans of the survival horror genre, it was a no-brainer that we'd sit down together to play Crow Country. And so we did, in a video that I made for the channel. What I was most pleasantly surprised by was the usage of the blocky graphical style, as it never felt like a gimmick. Some games will go, look at these graphics, isn't this like your childhood? Without understanding what made these visuals so appealing to begin with. Crow Country got it though. The depth of detail in every location, the sheer pops of color from the theme park setting, the absolute horror of each new enemy design as they shambled their way towards the protagonist, it all blends together to create a really cohesive visual package. In terms of the gunplay and the gameplay, you have to aim precisely at the different enemies, and it's up to you whether you want to try blowing off their heads or aiming for the legs or whatever floats your boat. Mira is a very fragile character though, so classic survival horror positioning is key to surviving the night. Add to this a host of different guns to unlock, secrets to find, and some really cool puzzles to solve, and you've got what I consider to be the best indie survival horror we've had since Signalis. My favorite moment was definitely the hedge maze room, as I think the wind effects combined with the art style just look so good. Yet I'm not sure if it was my favorite game of May 2024, because there was a real feel-good title that I just loved. Little Kitty, Big City. This mini open-world exploration game sees you trying to help a little kitty in the big city get back to their house at the top of a large apartment building. To do this, you have to run, jump, and meow your way across town, gathering fish so that you can energize yourself for the climb. A house cat being introduced to the wide world has a lot of promise, with you meeting various animals on your adventures who all need help in some way. There are some missing ducklings needing to be led back to their father, or maybe you'll find a struggling insect who needs to figure out how to handle their darling kitty cat influencer boss. The art style is absolutely precious, with this beautiful cel-shaded cartoon aesthetic that fits the premise perfectly. But none of this would work if it wasn't for the true masterpiece of this game, the cat themselves. The little kitty is animated so closely to that of an actual cat. You can tell the team have had pet cats in their past and know all the little idiosyncrasies that they do. The way it licks its little paws when it needs to clean itself, or how it will lazily bat a paw at something it needs to knock off a shelf, or how it struggles to climb with its little leggies kicking and flailing until it gains purchase. It is perfection. And no game about cats is complete without a meow button. Doesn't that just spark joy? I won't lie, hearing that meow brought me to tears. I grew up with 2 black cats myself that have been gone for a very long time, Fred and Sid, and this game really brought me back so many memories. Also, I bought the summer shirt for the game, so you can tell I enjoyed it, and I will be purchasing the Fangamer physical edition next year as well. I played and finished a lot of games in June, and while there's one very obvious standout we will get to, I have a couple other experiences I want to touch on first. Did you know that I had never played Final Fantasy X or X-2? Well, I fixed that this year as part of a deal between my partner and I. He would play the Xenoblade games if I played the Final Fantasy X games. And would you look at that, we both had a fantastic time. Final Fantasy X is a well-cohesive and structured RPG from start to finish. I ended up really enjoying every party member for what they brought to the table, be it a fun gameplay mechanic, an interesting character storyline, or Kamari's cake. The level up system being tied to the sphere grid was very weird for me at first, but once it clicked that I had full control over where I could take all of my characters as I used the advanced sphere grid, I ended up really enjoying my experience. I'd get that rush of excitement at being able to change a character's stats more often than you would with a traditional EXP-based system, and it meant I could create some devastating stats for my party. I actually ended up severely over-leveling in one of the first zones, because I promised my partner I would play the game with him watching, but I wanted to get a couple extra slots on the sphere grid. Apparently, I'm not supposed to have Lulu get the second stage elemental spells before making it to the temple on Kilika. Sue me! While the game is insanely linear, with most of the zones being a series of corridors you run down without much in the way of diverging paths, I think this is the one game where you can justify this. Yuna is on a pilgrimage. The whole point of this is that it's her final journey across Spira, and by forcing us to cross the country on foot with no real room for detours beyond a trip to the desert and an awkward wedding ceremony, it cements the feeling that time is running out. And the reveal of Tidus and his role in the events of the game was one of heartbreak. That ending sequence remains as bittersweet as it was back on the PS2. I really want to say I loved this game so much that I did get every character's ultimate weapon, which included dodging lightning strikes 200 times in a row, and perhaps the thing that I most regret, but I still did it, Blitzball for Waka. Ugh. I'm sure the people of Spira after the events of Final Fantasy X will take a lot of time to heal. Final Fantasy X-2 is about 3 dumb bitches telling each other exactly. And I mean that with the highest amount of praise possible. Following up one of the most depressing stories in the series with a high-octane comedic romp with a focus on cheering up the world of Spira through music, while allowing Yuna to live a little, is exactly what I needed from a sequel. The combat system has so much potential with the combos and the dress spheres, to the point where I knew I'd only scratched the surface by the time I finished the game. My partner loves this system and this game to death, and I'm happy to say that I did enjoy it, even if I don't think I got as much out of the combat. Pain is a great foil to Riku, with Yuna at the center holding on to their singular group brain cell, and getting to see the different places and characters we'd grown to love from the original game and how they're all settling in now was a real treat. Yuna especially deserves a spotlight for finally getting to live her life. She's been this meek summoner for the entirety of 10, so that when she's given the chance to explore herself in 10-2, she does so with aplomb. It all culminates near the end of the game when Yuna finally decides that, you know what, the rest of these people in the plot are fucking stupid, and she just takes things into her own hands.
I don't like your plan. It sucks.
I am aware the original director for 10 absolutely hates 10-2, and having seen their plans for what a 10-3 would be, as well as the novelizations for what would happen after 10-2's true ending, nah, fuck that. The man wants to ruin these characters out of spite, and I just don't vibe with it. Yuna deserves to be happy, and while I feel the true ending allowing her to reunite with Tidus is a bit of a cop-out, I'm still glad to see it happen. What I like is that the neutral ending of 10-2 is also a perfectly acceptable outcome. Yuna learning to handle the grief of losing someone close to her and being able to move on is something I bet a lot of players can relate to, and I'm glad that exists. And also, this game put a banger in my head that hasn't left for quite a while. 'Cause though 1,000 words have never been spoken, they'll fly to you, crossing over the time and distance holding you. Suspended on silver wings. And 1,000 words, 1,000 confessions will cradle you, making all of the pain you feel seem far away. They'll hold you forever. I was so off key for that last bit. Why did I do that? Do I leave that in? I'm not sure, but it is a bop. And also we got Yuna with a gun, so I think we're winning. Brother was fucking cringe though. Indigo Park Chapter 1 is a game I legally have to mention because I not only watched my partner play it, but my roommates and friend group as well. It's mascot indie horror, which in itself is a bit of an oversaturated market, but Indigo Park stands out for its more grounded mascots in my opinion. Rambly the Raccoon being an actual in-game character with a prominent voiced role is this game's biggest strength because it turns what would otherwise be a rather cookie-cutter experience and makes the game feel way more fresh and unique. The other characters are also full of life in their concept art and the various forms of media made in-universe, but I think they need a little more work on the monster forms. Lloyd the Lion has so much flamboyance, but that animatronic form in the game looks nothing like that. Molly McCaw looks like her form though, I'll give her that. I'd just like a bit more attention to detail in that sense, and I have no doubt this game will grow bigger with each new release. They've even nailed down that catchy Portal-style end credits song to keep people hooked. And let's be real here, they've got the furry audience. That's already half of the battle in mascot horror. Looking forward to more Indigo Park in the future. Nightmare Kart, formerly known as Bloodborne Kart, was a super fun racing game that originally started as a Bloodborne fan game before becoming its own thing after a cease and desist from our Lord and Savior, not Sony. It's not exactly a secret that it is basically still Bloodborne Kart, they just had to change a lot of assets and rename all the characters and locations to be legally distinct. Ah yes, the city of Melodia. And they had the full force of the internet behind them for this launch, so it ended up exceeding expectations. We've got circuit tracks, battle arenas, and even a few boss fights slotted in, which all feel right at home in Nightmare Kart. Combined with a stellar retro arcade soundtrack, it all just works. We've had a few balance patches since launch to make certain parts of the story easier, and support for Nightmare Kart is still going strong. You can play it on Steam or itch.io for free, so give it a go if you're into kart races. I knew it was special when the central Yharnam-based map had a knockoff cleric beast jump in at the end of the second lap. Brilliant. Lastly, for June's indies, we've got Duck Detective: The Secret Salami, a short 3-hour romp where you play as the titular duck detective. Work has dried up, your wife has left you, you've spent all your money on bread, and all that's left is to solve a case of stolen salami that in classic fashion delves far deeper into company politics than you would expect. Let's just say I wasn't expecting the subplot to involve illegal smuggling. The voice acting in this title is top-notch, sells the experience for me, and the way you piece together each of the puzzles with your deductions is simple yet effective. You get statements with blank spaces you have to fill in, which, when completed, allows you to progress to the next part of the story, very Obra Dinn in that sense. I especially like how the ending can change depending on who you choose as the culprit, as, in classic fashion, one person has to go down for the crime, but multiple people could feasibly take the fall. And with the next installment in the Duck Detective series on the way next year, I'm hoping these mini experiences become the bread and butter for their studio to continue building off of. And with that, we have finally covered all of the smaller games I've played in June, so let's get to the big one: Elden Ring: Shadow of the Erdtree. Easily the most important game releasing this year for me. I am a channel that covers Soulsborne titles, meaning Shadow of the Erdtree is my Christmas. An entirely new expansion from which to sink my teeth into, a revitalization of my channel to bring in new viewers and just experience more of what I love about these games. Shadow of the Erdtree is massive, the biggest expansion FromSoft has ever made, with a world in size and scope to the original Dark Souls. But what I loved is that they focused on vertical level design, where it's not about how far you can go, but how high or low you can go. Each layer with its own areas to explore, from the peaks of the ancient ruins of Rao to the shoreline of the Cerulean coast, and even further still to the darkness of the abyssal woods. You will find the world connecting in ways you never expected, and this is the type of open world level design I enjoyed the most. The combat of the DLC is enhanced immediately by a brand new host of weapons to play with, but what I love is that From Software specifically went with more dynamic options. You've got the Smith script throwable weapons for ranged users, the Great Katanas are these over-the-top blades that feel incredible to use and are very reminiscent of Monster Hunter. The light greatswords have a frenetic combo-based moveset that does heavy damage while keeping up fast speeds, more so when you get Rellana's twin blades and you can start adding magic and fire to the mix. Colossal hammers, perfumer bottles of varying types, the ability to just punch and kick your way through the game like a monk, and so many new spells and incantations to sink your teeth into. The areas are where I feel this game feels the most DLC, as I don't think they're the best legacy dungeons in FromSoft's catalogue. The Shadowkeep comes the closest, with this gigantic castle you explore multiple times from varying directions, with multiple hidden exits, yet even then I feel like certain elements like the varying levels of the Specimen Storehouse felt repetitive. The bosses are some of the best in the game, I'm not going to sugarcoat that. Rellana, Bale, Messmer, Midra, these are all fights that will be remembered as some of the greatest. It can stand toe-to-toe with our old favourites like Gale, Fume Knight, Artorias, Sister Fried, and Medea. And because the Land of Shadow is so much smaller than the lands between, I found it much easier to replay this DLC. I actively went out of my way to refight Radahn, Midra, and Bale on New Game Plus because I wanted to fight them without any gimmicks or summons, and I found it really easy to get back to those points in game. It's far more replayable than the base. I think there are a lot of design choices in Shadow of the Erdtree that reflect really well on From Software and what we could be seeing from them in the future with their next mainline title. So, all in all, it is the little DLC that could, and playing it with my partner and getting to watch his reactions to the new bosses and the new weapons was a treasured part of my 2024. You can check that video out in the description box below. I still think the Old Hunters is my favourite From Software DLC, just because I think the areas are a tad tighter overall, but Shadow of the Erdtree, you can't go wrong with it. We're halfway through the year, we just covered the biggest game I played, but we're far from done. Spiritfarer is a gorgeous game where you play as Stella, a young girl who helps shepherd the spirits of various people into the afterlife. It's always a sad moment when you have to say goodbye to someone you really care about, and yet getting to make them feel at peace with their situation is really satisfying. You have to explore different islands, collect materials, and craft various items and stations on your ship so that everyone can be comfortable. It's about adapting to the people around you and figuring out how to make them happy. But you're never on a time limit. Disapproval ratings might appear, but a good meal and a hug will fix that right up. I didn't finish Spiritfarer though, I got maybe 30% of the way into it before I just lost the urge to keep playing, but what I did manage was really beautiful, and I know it's a game that could easily get me crying if I get attached to a particular character. There's also a very cute cat called Daffodil, and I just think that's important. Cocoon is a fun 3D puzzle game I'd had on my radar for quite some time due to its director, Jeppe Carlsen, who you'll know from Limbo and Inside fame. His mind is an enigma for puzzle games, and with Cocoon doing away with the more horror elements of his previous work, I was actually more interested. You explore 3D environments from a top-down perspective, collecting colourful orbs, defeating a handful of bosses, and then unlocking special powers for those orbs, before solving handfuls of puzzles. The gimmick is that each orb you find is its own universe, an entire level within a spherical prison, so as you progress through the game, you're going deeper and deeper into the layers of these orbs, wrapping around on yourself and twisting reality with some real mind-bending puzzles to ultimately complete your journey. It's a game I really enjoyed and was the perfect length in my opinion. Any longer and I'd have gotten a bit fatigued. Instead, I just felt like a genius every time I solved a new room and made it to a new area or found a new orb to explore. Bow Path of the Teal Lotus is a Metroidvania that came out this year that, I'm gonna be honest here, and this is just a really embarrassing moment for me, I actually got it confused with Nine Souls. So egg on my face when it was revealed they were two separate games, but honestly, thank God, because it made me check out Bow Path of the Teal Lotus, and I ended up having a fantastic time with this game. It's set in what I assume is ancient Japan, with a focus on various yokai and spirits that are relevant to Japanese folklore. From a verdant forest jungle to a snow-swept mountain to a dark cavern filled with insects and beyond, there's a lot to see and do here. I'm a particular fan of just how many gorgeous animations there were in this game, especially the little upgrade sequences in the main city. You can tell they worked so hard on them. Platforming in Bow is exceptionally difficult, I'm not gonna lie to you. If you're planning on playing this game because it looks cozy and cute, Bow is going to kick your ass. It has a lot of insanely difficult platforming setups in the late game, but even the early game, like the Hashihime Bridge level, is pure platforming and skill. I was surprised at how quickly the game throws you into sequences where you have to rely on instinct to stay alive. The main mechanic is how long you can stay in the air. Hitting an enemy replenishes your mid-air jump, so you can feasibly stay in the sky for as long as you want, as long as you have an enemy to hit, which is very useful in boss fights when you're trying to do as much damage as possible. Combined with the usual charm system popularized by Hollow Knight, and you have a surprisingly in-depth game for upgrading your character. They also have a boost movement tool with certain projectiles that is very reminiscent of Ori and the Blind Forest. It took a long time for me to get used to, but by the end of Bow, I just felt really strong. It was a beautiful game, told a really good story, and had some well-written characters. There was a lot of love for the community in the game as well, with many of the main town NPCs being guest cameos from backers, and I'm really happy I ended up playing Bo. It's just a shame then that they were caught in the Humble Games publishing scandal, as Humble Games gutted their publishing studio just days after the launch of Bo, which the team at Squidshock Studios were rightfully upset about as they lost all back-end support of their product for consoles. So definitely go and support them if this game looks remotely interesting to you. My favourite title I tried in July though was Master Key. It came out in May this year, but I only discovered it a few months later. It's a top-down 1-bit adventure game that immediately had me thinking about titles like Minute, with the focus on a simple art style. You play as a little fox who discovers a key and goes on a journey into the overworld to figure out where that key goes. It's a game that is, by design, unguided. You don't get any hints on where to go. You reach a town and people speak through speech bubbles with images. You have to intuit what they mean and find out where you need to go. You'll eventually find dungeons, face a boss, unlock a new item, and learn of the other dungeon locations, which leads into the gameplay loop. Explore, discover, overcome. It's such a simple game in premise and in combat that you can't help but enjoy getting lost in the world. It never gets so complex that you're left there thinking, what now? Generally, progression is all about exploring where you haven't been, or finding an NPC that you haven't met. The simple accompanying music is ear candy to me. The little character you play as is reminiscent of the Ruin Seeker from Tunic, which is a big plus, because foxy little guys are just adorable. I really want a keychain of him. I do think the combat was a bit weak as the game progressed. Enemies focused more on doing higher amounts of damage as opposed to having more complex movements or designs, which led me to avoiding combat encounters towards the end game. The dungeon design was fantastic, the secrets you could find in the overworld were great, and I really loved that every location had a different aesthetic despite being the same 2 colors throughout the whole game. A snow-swept forest, a spooky mansion, a drowned electrical plant, all leading to a dramatic endgame where you finally discover where that key goes. What I'm most excited about is how developer Acromy was actually so inspired by their time developing Master Key that they're already launching a Kickstarter for the sequel, Havenlocked, which promises to be more of a Link's Awakening style deal with an island paradise you can't escape, and there's a hook shot. With a virgin pina colada to boot, don't sleep on this one guys, it is worth your time. August was similar to March in that I mostly just played games I wanted to cover for the channel. Firstly, I got my recording done for The Legend of Zelda Oracle of Seasons and Oracle of Ages. I played Seasons first, which is the more combat-focused of the 2 games, and the one with the more traditional Zelda layout, shall we say. The land of Holodrum really is just a backdrop for getting to the next dungeon and fighting the next host of enemies and bosses. There's just no story here. Din gets kidnapped at the start of the game, you chat to Mr. Tree once, and then you don't see anyone relevant again until the very end of the game, aside from a Twin Rover appearance in the 6th dungeon. And then you're just facing down Onox, you save the Oracle of Seasons, bish bash bosh, meh. As someone who really likes a Zelda story, this fell so flat. Luckily, the gameplay is top-notch, the changing of the various seasons is a fresh enough system to keep me engaged, with each part of the world having 4 unique ways to view it depending on which season you engage in. The dungeons, while a little lighter on the puzzles, host a ton of fun combat scenarios that will genuinely challenge you. I died a lot in Oracle of Seasons, not gonna lie, and for the most part, I had a lot of fun. But I could tell I was getting a bit sick of the 4-directional sword swings from the player now that I've played modern 2D Zelda for too much time. I'll always raise a hand in salute for the old guard though, the reused bosses of Zelda 1 with a brand new coat of paint, yes, even you, Dig Dogger. But I don't think it comes as a surprise that Oracle of Ages was the game I enjoyed more. I think its soundtrack is arguably worse, but that's the one knock against the game I have. Instead, we have a brilliant story with Nehru and Ralph and Queen Ambi and Varen. These are characters that appear in the game and give Link a reason to continue his quest. We have more fun setups to get to dungeons. I really like Crescent Island. It was genius by having you get robbed of your items and forced to parlay with the very simple-minded Tokes. Recollecting your stuff in this mini shipwreck moment before allowing you to enter the dungeon, priceless. Speaking of dungeons, I think they are some of the best in 2D Zelda. Moonlit Grotto, Ancient Tomb, Skull Dungeon, they're all elaborate complexes that teaches you mechanics, elaborates on them, and provides some really memorable main puzzles to solve. Dropping the giant turntable in the Moonlit Grotto, or solving each floor of the Ancient Tomb so you can keep progressing downwards, and then the use of color was done to great effect with a lot of puzzles in the game, focusing on those primary color elements. And outside of the dungeons, we have two different worlds, the past and present, to explore. And while it's not the first time Zelda has done the two worlds gimmick, it's the first time we've seen it on a handheld, and it's the first game to dive into the idea of the past affecting the present. They could have gone further, but what they did was fair enough. These games being linked also meant I could pair them up with each other for special events back in Holodrum, which could then have rewards sent to Labrynna, and it was just a really fun journey to be had. Lena's Inception is a procedurally generated adventure RPG made by Byton Studio, who I knew as the Cassette Beasts developer. Their original game was a top-down Zelda-like where you play as Lena, a schoolteacher turned reluctant hero, who has to help stop an evil glitch from ruining the land. I didn't end up playing the game to completion, as I actually found myself stuck on the final boss in my first run, but I really enjoyed the game and how it plays with player expectations. Each run is different, the overworld is randomly designed, and even the order you face the Archangel bosses in each dungeon is completely random. There's a true ending you can only get by doing very specific actions that you're just not going to know about on a first run, but it works in line with the story to sell a very specific narrative. And all of this because of a fridge of infinite pizza slices. Well, for Lena, it's time to find a new groove, polish her best moves, and turn up the song. She's leaving it all out to dry now. If you're a 2D Zelda fan, or you like games that aren't fully clear about their intentions but you don't mind getting stuck in, I think Lena's Inception is for you. Ending this month, we have a Game of the Year contender for me, Crypt Custodian. This top-down Metroidvania sees you playing as Pluto, a cat who is recently deceased and sentenced to cleaning up the afterlife. What this entails is visiting the various different regions to clear up dangerous enemies and make friends with the local spirits. Because Kendra, the arbiter of all of the afterlife, hasn't let anyone into heaven for a very long time, and some of the animals have a plan to break in and see what's what. The best way I can describe the gameplay is if Hyperlight Drifter's combat had a baby with a cartoon aesthetic. Some of the areas are genuinely beautiful, like the zone with the switching blocks and the almost ethereal underwater aesthetic. There's the snowy mountains to the north, an abandoned Japanese amusement park, a disturbing cinema alongside your classic ancient ruins, beautiful mountain peaks, and poison swamps. What impressed me was how I always felt the game was coming to an end, and then the map just kept going. More and more areas to explore, some really fun puzzles and movement tools to mess around with. Yet I never got bored or fatigued. I was invested in these adorable characters, as every animal you meet has a small backstory to them. You can even find photos in each area that explains exactly what their lives were and how they passed away, and as someone who has lost a lot of pets over the years, it tugs at the heartstrings. Combat is very bullet hell focused, I won't lie, which is a turn off for some, but I found everything very rewarding and fulfilling, especially the boss fights, which are absolutely fantastic. Some of them have the most messed up designs like the Moon Man, some of them look goofy like the Ice Witch, and it's all just a really enjoyable experience. I made a video on the bosses when the game came out, please give it a look. It's a video I really wish had done better, especially since this game has a boss replay option in the menu. Thank you! Time trials, yes please. Refighting bosses, you're so kind. And then the ending, oh god. I'm actually getting a little teary thinking about it. The reason why the animals wanted to break into heaven is because there's a special mirror there, which, when used, allows a spirit to return to the world of the living for a very brief period of time. And seeing Pluto in his little spectral form curl up next to his family who are asleep and they don't even know that their cat is dead, and the other spirits being with their loved ones in the end credits, ooh, I was a mess. I am a mess writing this script, and yep, I'm a mess while recording this. Oh, Crypt Custodian, it's a 10 out of 10. It's on Steam, please go play it. September was an incredibly busy month for me. Turns out I like gaming, and I played a lot of games this month alongside my partner. Starting off, we tried Hollow Body, a third-person horror game developed by Headwear Games, a solo developer who, I just want to stress, made a really good game. I was very excited for this title. It felt like it had a real aesthetic to it. The energy was giving early Silent Hill, and my partner and I, both being horror fans, wanted this to be similar to Crow Country, a game that surpassed our expectations earlier in the year, but instead for a PS2 era game. What we got was a title that has all the pieces, but didn't really put them together at launch in a way that felt satisfying. Camera controls were overly sluggish, the tank controls weren't true tank controls according to my partner, which threw him off. A lot of the outside environments felt quite linear and a little uninteresting to explore, even if the aesthetic design was on point. I have been to one of those British towns for sure. The first dungeon, shall we say, the apartment building, is actually really well designed, with a great grasp of both puzzle design and enemy variety. It gave the game a very positive starting point, which it just failed to capitalize on. I think the overall lack of bosses, or at least major mini-boss encounters to give your weapons a semblance of use, was a real choke point for me. The final boss of the game is also the first boss of the game, and it used a detonator mechanic, except we were playing with controller, and for some reason the detonate button wasn't mapped to an actual button on our controller. So I had to lean down and press the middle mouse button on my mouse while my boyfriend was running around with the controller. It really was a mess. Voice acting was genuinely fantastic though. I thought all of you captured British life in a really great way. I've met most of those people in my lifetime, and some of the stories you could learn about in certain areas were really sad. I think the voice actors should really pat themselves on the back, they did amazing. I was overly critical of this game in my Steam review of Hollow Body, but that's because I felt like I was seeing a lot of flaws that publications at the time were just ignoring. I wanted my critiques to be constructive, because I really do think what the Hollow Body dev did was amazing in its own way for a single person. And I have to say, the post-launch patches that Nath has been putting out have been addressing a lot of my complaints. Extra puzzles for areas that felt empty, a new third-person mode, various quality of life changes. I would like to try this game again at some point and see if it feels better next time around. Salt and Sanctuary was a game I replayed for the channel in September, the original 2D Souls-like from way back when. They took everything from Dark Souls and really made it their own. Covenant systems with varying healing flasks, a vast and interconnected world with bosses at the end of most areas, a series of different weapons to make the game feel fresh, magic brands that act as power-ups to help you explore more of the island, with a lot of flipping gravity and revealing light platforms, a double jump. It's all just really unique. An island cobbled together from the memories of various civilizations that shouldn't be there. A nameless god who feeds on those experiences of his victims, drawing them into the maelstrom until they either go hollow or make their way deep into the island's core. Side note, in the final area of the game, you meet an NPC who's meant to be incredibly important. His name? Fucking Jared. Not Jared from Subway, oh god. Sultan Sanctuary still has a dedicated player base because it's a fun game with a lot of replayability and a surprising amount of depth to its combat, even if it's easy to cheese at the best of times. Bosses are the highlights, of course. There are a couple annoying ones like the Kraken Worm, for example, but then you have some real treats like the Queen of Smiles or the Third Lamb, some real wild designs here. I don't think the game is pretty, shall we say. The style is very PS3, PS4 gritty era desaturated, which isn't my cup of tea, but it's fun, and I'm glad the game held up. Crosscode is a game I have heard about for years, a single-player RPG with the backdrop of an MMO game. So your party members in-universe are actual real people who need to log out at the end of a dungeon, or talk about their days and how miserable their jobs are, while Leah, your main character, is this enigma. Who is she? Why is she here? Who is Sergei? Why is he helping her? By going through this fictional game, which is also the real game Crosscode, you find out. I love the combat in this title. It's fast, it's fluid, it's fun, you have multiple elements and skill trees to mess around with, and more than anything, I'm impressed that this single-player game has endgame mechanics like an MMO, with an arena to fight tough enemies, and stores in the endgame city that allow you to fully upgrade your character how you want. It reminds me of the tombstones in Final Fantasy XIV. For me though, the highlights here are the music, which is some of the catchiest I've heard in a while, and the story, which kept me intrigued from beginning to end, and even has a post-game DLC that wraps up all of the little loose plot threads. Emily is best girl. I would kill for this French gal, and you cannot stop me. The dungeon design in this game, which is designed to teach players how to master each of the 4 elements you obtain throughout each of these labyrinths, are fucking inspired. There are so many ways to use the elemental shots that I could barely comprehend in my playtime. Many puzzles where I sat there stumped until I had a eureka moment and was like, that's possible? They all have a great flow to them, and they're quite lengthy as well, with some dungeons having mid-spots for rests. There's even a hidden timer in the game where you and Emily race to beat each dungeon first, and if you beat this hidden timer, you can get a hidden achievement for beating Emily in every dungeon race. That being said, like an MMO, it's plagued with boring old fetch quests for experience, and while Crosscode's story continues, I found it very funny seeing characters complaining about where the next proper dungeon is, because by the time you reach the in-universe endgame, the company behind Crossworlds, the MMO you're playing in Crosscode, haven't developed the next patch yet. It's a really great game, even if some of the story beats involving Leah felt a little obvious going in. Lastly, the big game of September was The Legend of Zelda: Echoes of Wisdom, the brand new top-down Zelda by Grezzo. The first time we've ever been able to control Zelda in a proper open-adventure Zelda game, it was a magical experience. Zelda has the ability to create echoes of just about everything she touches and every enemy she kills, which gives her a very different vibe in combat. You can summon powerful enemies to fight back, mixing and matching depending on the situation. You have so many platforms and elemental items to cross gaps, light torches, create sparks, climb cliffs, and with the ability to bind yourself to specific platforms and enemies, you can even find fun ways to move yourself. We have the return of traditional Zelda dungeons, albeit a little on the simpler side than we're used to. Playing the older 2D games showed me that Echoes of Wisdom's dungeon offerings were mostly quite short and very linear, with the Gerudo and Farron dungeons being the major exceptions. I still loved every moment of this game, discovering a new enemy, echo in a cave, or finding a hidden boss I didn't know existed, like the reveal of Smog, or Baronade, or the Fire Giant. Similarly, getting to fight Ganon as Zelda is something I think fans of this series can only dream of. Then, getting a major lore dump that gives Hyrule its own Kirby-style Eldritch abomination to slay just really added the cherry on top. I still get goosebumps taking on the final boss alongside Link, with both of us working together in harmony to overcome everything. The way Zelda is treated as well is super refreshing. She can enter Gerudo Town without getting attacked by the residents because she's a girl. She's respected where she goes after clearing her name following the Hyrule Castle dungeon. She has the same urge to explore as Link, and I want more. I want more playable Zelda, and I want more of her personality. The only thing is that she has the ability to turn into Sword Fighter Zelda, which suggests to me that the developers weren't wholly confident that the ecosystem would be enough to beat this game. So having a get out of jail turn Zelda into Link card allows players a way out if things are too tough, but I'd say it's a bit of a design flaw. I wish she could just use the sword normally without needing to inherit Link's skills. Let Zelda be an Arya Stark and not a Sansa. I want to play this game again in hero mode, but I lent my copy of the game to my old roommate, and they are taking their time. But they're a big Zelda fan, so it's okay. We're not done with September yet though, as it's time to pay off a comment from earlier, as over the summer, I got Ion to play Xenoblade Chronicles 3, and we finished it in September. I was so nervous going into the third game. It is my favorite of the trilogy and one of my favorite games of all time. I knew my partner would enjoy it more than the second game, I knew that, but I wasn't sure by how much. You know how when you start a game, you might not remember all the character names or information is a bit fuzzy? I was worried that would be the case with Ion and Xenoblade 3 and he just wouldn't remember the characters or anything as he played. But to my genuine surprise and absolute delight, he fell in love with the world of Ionios and with our playable characters. Of course the gameplay is fun. I watched as Ion got very deep into changing out his skills and leveling up his abilities, and figuring out which classes he really wanted to specialize in. With gem farming, I helped out and did a bit of the work off camera, including a trip towards the end of the playthrough to kill some high-level unique monsters so that he'd have more use for Triton's class, with his permission. But Ion did pretty much all the work. He got deep into the lore of the game, did all of the side quests in all of the colonies to make sure to unlock every hero quest, and that includes the 2 DLCs. We both had a moment during Ino's questline where the Xenoblade 2 music started playing and we got super hype, which shows it was worth playing Xenoblade Chronicles 2, haha! He got into the combat flow, really enjoyed the chain attack system and the Ouroboros powers, and everything just worked. This was a game for him. And of course, that also meant he got invested in the stories of our main cast. He got emotional alongside the rest of us during Chapter 5, and I could tell he loved this group because he remembered all their names. He was so into the lore of the games that he knew during the Nia scene where she gets shot that she wouldn't actually die because it didn't hit her core crystal. I was so excited for every new moment and story beat to see how he handled it, all leading to the final battle and the subsequent ending where all of that care, all of those bonds pay off. I think he had a couple of tears during the last series of cutscenes. Not as many as me, I was bawling my eyes out, but when we finished Xenoblade 3, I knew that I had made him a fan. The fact that he's curious about going back to the first game to play it himself is enough proof. On the flip side, I also played a game for Ion in September, Shadow Heart's Covenant, a PS2 RPG where every attack, every item, and every spell is left up to the whims of the Judgment Ring. This is a system where you have to hit the X button as a line whirls around a circle, as it goes into various coloured slots. You always want to aim for red for those perfects where you'll get the highest damage, and it is very addictive. It's like a slot machine every time you play, or a rhythm game that keeps you invested in even the simplest attacks. Your party all specialize in different skills. Yuri can transform into various demons of all different elements, making him a very flexible character in terms of what he can do. Karen is a fast-hitting damage dealer that uses fire magic. Geppetto, yes, that Geppetto, can use every element with special attacks, and can dress up Cornelia, his doll, in different dresses to change his own base element. Joaquin is a gay vampire wrestler who can randomly switch between 4 different forms, each with their own unique pros and cons, and he can also just pick up random items you find in locations for his future weapon upgrades. Lucia is a fucking queen whom we stan. She has oil she can use to give the party various effects, or a true gacha tarot card system where once in a battle she can pull out a random card for various effects. Double experience? Cool. The entire party dies except for her? Cool. Anastasia can take pictures of enemies to reveal their stats and is also the best water mage. Blanca is a wolf and has some of the best support skills in the game while having some of the worst voice lines in the game. And Corando. Dungeons in this game aren't too large or grandiose, which I personally prefer. They always have a fun boss at the end with unique gimmicks, and the fact this is set during World War I means we have some wild historical moments to experience. Did you know Rasputin is a Disc 1 antagonist? I think that says it all. It's such a charming game with such a unique premise and gameplay system that I absolutely fell in love. If you ever get the chance to play Shadow Hearts Covenant, please do, it is so worth your time. Also artists, I'm just gonna shout you guys out as well. Yuri has many demon forms, and many of them would appeal to the monster fuckers out there. Do with that what you will. So October had some heavyweight titles like Metaphor ReFantazio, Silent Hill 2 Remake, Dragon Ball Sparking Zero, and Never, all games I really wish I could have played. But this was the month where I moved out of my old roommate's place and into our new apartment, which is where I am now. As such, I genuinely didn't play anything. I was so focused on work and making sure that everything went smoothly. The only game I had a chance with was Super Mario Party Jamboree, which I think is the best Mario Party in a very long time. It has a host of genuinely inspired boards like the shopping center and the raceway, while giving older boards like the Western Land and Mario's Cloud Castle a fresh lick of paint. The minigames were hit or miss. I like a lot of them, but I do miss some of the previous games' fare, and I don't understand why Nintendo have never done minigame packs for DLC. It's a surefire money-making scheme. The Jamboree system is so broken in the funniest way possible. I'm not playing Mario Party for a fair time. 2 stars per turn? Sure thing, Diva, I'm down. We know those bonus stars are gonna fuck you over at the end anyway. Ninja is my main, and winning is my game, unless it's Gatekeepers, in which case I'll just turn the switch off, thank you very much. While I did the single player mode in October, I have since played Mario Party a couple of times with friends when they've come to visit, and that's where I feel the game really comes alive. I've never had that opportunity before, so having people who actually want to play with me just makes me really excited. I have so many potential multiplayer games in the wings, just waiting for the right time to strike, and Mario Party just happened to be the easiest to get people into right now. So yeah, that was my October. Fun. We're finally nearing the finish line, and starting off November, we've got Mario & Luigi Brothership, the newest installment in a series we all thought died with Alpha Dream. Turns out, Acquire got the chance to work on it, and given the Kadokawa Corporation x Sony rumors, this might be the last time we see Mario and Luigi from this developer. If there's one thing I think they nailed, it is the expressions. Mario and Luigi are so creatively excited, and every look, every glance, every step, every bounce, it all feels so in line with the series. They speak gibberish again! Glorious, exciting! Slay. The battle system is as fun as it's ever been, with some really fun bros attacks to mess around with. I especially love Mario's Zawarudo, where they just decimate their opponents through time. The enemy and boss designs are really fun and exciting, and with the larger screen due to this being a home console release, we can really appreciate everything that much more. It makes the enemies more readable, makes the world more alive, and ultimately brings a smile to my face. It's a shame then that I'm really not a fan of the game's structure. The island system makes everything feel less like an RPG and more like a traditional Mario game, with each island basically being a small platforming level. The locales themselves are fun. The skyscraper city where capitalism rules is in stark contrast to a desert town where people happily scavenge to survive. Maybe you'll solve a mystery in a coastal town encompassed in night, or you'll have a wedding between two tribes to bring them together, hot and cold. It's just the traversal that lets the game down. I don't find the sailing fun or engaging, and I don't think it justifies its existence well enough. And this is arguably one of the more egregious games when it comes to backtracking, which the sailing system encourages quite a lot. I don't mind a little backtracking here and there, but with this game, it's like revisiting old islands becomes an annoying habit. Spoilers for the end game here. I want to rant a little, head to the timestamp on screen if you want to avoid it. I don't want to go to Rumbler for the 5th time. Make it stop. Which is made worse with the endgame where after infiltrating Zocket's castle and experiencing the birth of the true villain Reclusa, who has a very cool design by the way, you're forced to go around all of your islands again, picking up bonds from the various characters you've met to fill the bond can. I do like that the extension core group gets a bond moment. They're really fun villains, and Shun is my spirit animal and my new Nintendo Switch Online profile picture, but I found it crazy that not once did Mario or Luigi use their own bond to fill the can during these sequences. Also, in the final dungeon, the fake Mushroom Kingdom sequence when Reclusa catches you in his flowers lasts so fucking long. The moment we figure out Reclusa is causing this, the sequence should end, forcing us to chase after him for the next 15 minutes just so you can shoehorn in a silly camera gimmick killed the pacing here, which is a real shame. Also, did you know I got soft-locked in the final dungeon? I placed down this item on a pedestal that I wasn't supposed to place it on, and for some reason, I just didn't get the prompt to pick it back up, and the only way I could fix this was by reloading an old save, so that's quite heartbreaking, isn't it? The final boss was also way too easy for me. Something about a third of the fight being an auto shooter that is very hard to fail was not my cup of tea. But not every boss can be a Dark Matter or a Cackleta's Soul, can it? Despite my bitching, I enjoyed Brothership. It's a solid 7 out of 10. Luigi's focus and story relevance was also well deserved, but the pacing of the game just means I'm not going back to it in the future. Nioh was another game I played in November, thanks to my accidental renewal of my PS Plus subscription in September. As such, I figured I'd use it to my advantage and tick off a major game on my Souls-likes I haven't played list. I knew Nioh would feel different to Dark Souls. What I didn't know though was that it had a Diablo-style loot system, and I'm gonna be blunt, I really don't like those systems. I'm not the type to enjoy finding an extra 0.5% to my blunt damage because I got a rare weapon drop, ooh! So I basically just picked the things with the highest stats and sold everything else for money or Amrita. The actual designs of the missions in Nioh were really fun. I could see elements of Koei Tecmo's past games there, with a lot of the maps being very flat without much elevation, but it made some of the better missions like the Spider Nest Castle or the Water Shrine stand out more. I loved getting used to the various yokai and enemies. I ended up sticking to the Kusarigama the whole playthrough because I found the weapon cool, and it led to a lot of great encounters. The bosses were the toughest part of the game, and I had a steep learning curve initially with Hino Enma, but once I figured out how the game wanted me to handle specific types of attacks and I'd leveled up a little more, I felt way more comfortable in Nioh's world. What's funny is so many people are saying that Nioh 2 is infinitely better than Nioh 1, and if the case is true, I'm very much ready to jump ship and head there. But as someone who plays these games just to experience them, I never got the desire to go beyond the post-game with Nioh. I'm not even sure I have the desire to play the DLC, and I just think there's a lot of extra stuff in this game that isn't for me. Great game, enjoyed the videos I made on it, but I don't think I'll be revisiting it. We also played Lies of P with my partner Ion. We wanted to do, initially, a playthrough video similar to the Elden Ring one, where we'd get his live reactions to everything. But as it turns out, filming these videos after he gets home from work just means he's not very animated, and neither of us are in the mood to talk. So instead, we decided to do a tier list video for Lies of P instead, and what I realized is this is still one of the best Souls-likes out there. Every single mechanic just works in Lies of P, from the deflections, the different weapons that you can mix and match, your arms. It's just so much fun. Combat in this game is so rewarding and so exciting. The bosses are so well designed, and the idea of Pinocchio as a Souls game is still inherently the funniest thing in the world. I think I've made a fan out of Ion of Lies of P. I know we're both looking forward to the DLC coming in 2025, and I think we are both looking forward to Dorothy Souls' Lies of D whenever it comes out. The last 2 games of November, I'm going to follow a pattern here. We have 2 more Zelda games on the list as I replayed Wind Waker and Minish Cap for the purposes of future videos. Now, I was very excited for Wind Waker. It's one of the 3D games I remember briefly playing as a kid. It's the one that many Zelda fans have called their favorite for a long time, and being able to play the HD version on the Wii U meant I got the Swift Sail and the slightly less irritating Triforce quests, so I can't complain. What I got, for the time, was a groundbreaking open sea, the various islands with things to see and do, random encounters with big octos if you follow the seagulls, submarines to explore for loot, sea charts to dig up heart containers and rupees. It's all exciting. Except for me, the ocean feels too big and too empty for its own good. Most of the islands and reefs in Wind Waker are either filler, in the sense that you're just here to get some rupees, or not interesting. Dragon Roost Island, Forest Haven, Outset Island, and Windfall Island are the only areas to have an actual thriving population, and I can't help thinking that out of a possible 49 quadrants of the ocean, more of them should have been dedicated to settlements. I love that Wind Waker is effectively a giant scavenger hunt. You listen to fish for hints, you explore some islands to gain access to other islands to eventually reach dungeons, such as with the Fire Mountain and Ice locations. There are special charts you can find to help discover specific types of treasure, including the pieces of heart that can make your life so much easier so very quickly into the game. It is insane how fast you can boost Link's health before getting the Master Sword. But it comes at the cost of the game's pacing. Once you beat the Wind Temple, it all comes to a halt, and I just don't find that as exciting or interesting to play as other people. The dungeons are great, a little simple at times, sure, but they have such character, and the bosses are all fantastic. But then the actual sailing, oh god, I'm gonna get cancelled for this one. I prefer Phantom Hourglass. You don't fully control the boat in that game, but every island you find has a purpose. There are pirates that can catch you, which you have to shoot as you go. Linebeck is such a cool companion, and the DS screen allowed for some really fancy sea chart bullshit. Here in Wind Waker, it's a little aimless, which is a positive for many players, I recognize that. It's just not my cup of tea. Minish Cap, meanwhile, despite having the smallest overworld in the series, feels packed to the brim with things to do. 5 major dungeons split across the game, each with their own theme and mechanics, a host of genuinely great 2D bosses that have a serious amount of charm, the exploration involving the Kinstones and causing aspects of the world to change, genius. Switching sizes to solve puzzles on Mount Crenel, or soaring into the skies above Hyrule, or exploring the darkened Royal Valley. There's so much to see, and the pacing is brilliant. Link has so many fighting tools in this one. The items he gains are all relatively interesting, like the Gust Jar, and the use of Wind Waker assets and colour really makes this game pop on the Game Boy Advance. It's not perfect though. I ended up playing the European version as I'm from Europe, unaware that we got a slightly earlier build of the game, so certain small changes meant I couldn't get a piece of heart in Castletown earlier, and certain design choices leave a lot to be desired, but I will leave that for my Minish Cap videos. Whoever thought it was a good idea to lock a heart piece behind a fucking gacha system though, I'm not upset, I'm just disappointed. That's how I'm ending November, slaving over gacha. And finally, we reach December. We have a few more games to tackle, starting with me finally getting around to Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown. It's a fantastic game from start to finish that really carves a niche for itself in the Prince of Persia brand. I love the art direction, from the way in cutscenes where moves will have these beautiful flourishes like a Western action cartoon, to the aesthetics of the entire world having this Pixar energy to it. There's a real care for Persian history here. I feel like there's a lot of mythology I learned through playing the game that's really fascinating to me, and the story starts off insanely strong with a great plot hook that carries through the second half of the game. It only veers into messy territory at the very end. They didn't have the best way to conclude everything. I feel like another cutscene or two would have helped to flesh out why Child Varum is in the ending, or what happened to Queen Tamiris, or the deep reveal about a third prince in the prophecies that really should have been a part of the main game's plot and not something we learned about via text or the Sands of Time collectibles. But ignoring all of that, the gameplay is fire. Metroidvanias are an oversaturated genre now, so finding ways to stand out becomes increasingly more difficult. The Lost Crown manages this by both providing unique gameplay power-ups that feel different from the normal fare, while giving a lot of accessibility options for regular players. For example, letting you take screenshots of the room you're in, which will then be saved to the map screen. This lets you recall hidden items, doors, chests, or passages for later use. On top of that, because this is a Prince of Persia game, time is a mechanic in both the story and the gameplay. You've got the usual air dash and jump skills, but you also have more interesting abilities. Ripping open a pocket in time to store an enemy or projectile which you can then release at a later moment, leaving a time fragment of yourself that at a press of a button you can warp back to. These abilities add so much strategy to every fight and every boss that makes the game feel so much more fluid and original. Does it have a little of the Ubisoft jank? Yes, certain UI elements are a bit of a mess, some major story beats happen in paid DLC, and the game definitely suffered from some rushed development towards the end. But the pure passion on display from the developers pushes those aside to showcase a real triumph of a Metroidvania. Then I got the chance to play the Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver Remastered, which is part of a bundle alongside the second game. Soul Reaver is a PS1 classic. I have the box art as a keychain, and Raziel was one of my favourite protagonists when I was younger. Replaying the game, the level of gravitas that comes from the voice acting just accentuates the high lore and scope that Crystal Dynamics were going for. This was a series with such a deep mythos, every character having more detailed lore in the game manuals that enriched playtime. This remaster included a lot of concept art, fan art, and most importantly, levels that were planned for the original game that got cut from the final release, but brought back in a playable form so you can look through them like they were museum exhibits. This all makes a lot of sense when you learn that the director for the game, Monika Erosova, was one of the biggest contributors to the fan community of the series. Having made multiple fan-modded graphic packs prior to Remastered, you can check out the no-clip documentary on this series for way more information there. There was nobody better to bring the game into the modern era. The game itself was a triumph for having 0 loading screens in its runtime, everything was connected, while also having 2 different worlds you could shift between at any time to solve puzzles and progress. Combat was rudimentary, quite simple, not really the focus of the game. You can spear enemies or burn them, the boss fights equated to figuring out puzzles over battles, and yet I'm fine with that. Soul Reaver was not a combat-focused title, it was a block-pushing focused title. I joke, but a majority of the game's puzzles do revolve around block puzzles, to the point where you could call it a Sokoban game. Understandable for the time it was developed, but nowadays I have to wonder what a full remake could do to the land of Nosgoth. We're all dying for a truly stunning vampire IP to retake the reins after all. Soul Reaver still holds up all these years later without a doubt, but might feel a little tedious to new audiences who are used to a faster pace. PS Plus also gave me one final gift before I let its subscription run out on the 20th, as I finally got around to playing The Last Guardian by Fumito Ueda. Fitting, given mere weeks after I played it, we'd get the Project Robot announcement at the Game Awards. I always knew going into The Last Guardian that this wasn't going to be a game about puzzles or combat or exploration. It was going to be a pet simulator, complete with the joys and annoyances of owning a real animal. Trico is a marvel of AI, to the point where he's so realistic that sometimes he doesn't even listen to you. You'll be wanting him to stand against a wall or jump at a platform, and he won't get it because he's his own beast, and creating that bond with him takes time. Impatience will net frustration, which is why I went into Last Guardian knowing this was a possibility, and thus having the patience of a saint. I'd pet Trico anytime he did a good job. I'd pull spears from his feathers after a tough fight. I'd watch my heart melt anytime he tried to fit his head through a small gap, or cheer anytime he'd find a way to catch the boy during a trust fall. The bond between the player and Trico only continues to grow with each puzzle, each ruin, each interaction, which makes moments like Trico finding the player in the cage, or Trico trying to awaken the boy who isn't moving, all the more meaningful. By the game's ending, I was an ugly mess, because after forming this tight-knit bond with the creature you'd truly grown to care for, he returns you home and is immediately, and understandably, threatened by your village. And with the same buttons you've been using to command Trico the whole game, you have to tell him to leave. And he doesn't understand at first, but you keep saying it until he finally turns around and escapes. The fact that the player themselves are forced to effectively abandon Trico, like a family leaving an unwanted pet behind, it made me so viscerally uncomfortable in a heartbreaking way. All my pets growing up were strays adopted into the family, so I guess it just is something I feel very strongly about. God, what is it with animal games this year and trying to break me? And that's it. That's 2024. So let's get to the moment you've all been waiting for. What are my games of the year? So let's start with the older games that I played for the first time in 2024. My top 5 for those are Crosscode, an RPG I was just really surprised by. Final Fantasy X and X-2, I'm grouping them together because I played the remaster, which they both come in together as a package, and I just think that they are fantastic stories. Spira is an amazing world, and there's still so much for me to do in them if I ever want to go back to those games. At number 3, Shadow Heart's Covenant, an RPG I really wasn't expecting to like, but the battle system is genuinely some of the most fun I have had in a video game. At number 2, Armored Core 6, Fires of Rubicon. It's from Software. I didn't think I was gonna like the mecha, turns out I did, and I almost platinumed it if it wasn't for some really annoying S ranks to try and achieve. It's just such a good game. But my number 1 is The Last Guardian. It's the most recent game I played for this category, and it made me cry. It made me remember exactly why I love Fumito Ueda's games, and it just makes me want to replay Echo and Shadow of the Colossus all over again. But now you're here for my top 5 games of 2024. I've got a few honorable mentions, Little Kitty Big City and Crow Country, which are both fantastic indies. I just didn't have space in my top 5. And Echoes of Wisdom. I thought long and hard, and while I adore Zelda's new outing, and I think it's a brilliant game, there's just something about my top 5 that I prefer. At number 5, we have Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, a fantastic Metroidvania that will stand the test of time. I need to do a boss ranking once I finish the DLC. At number 4, Elden Ring: Shadow of the Erdtree, a brilliant expansion that brings some of the best bosses, areas, and weapons into Elden Ring. I just want my top 3 games this year to be actual games instead of DLC. At number 3, Master Key, my surprise 1-bit RPG that I'm already itching to replay, and I urge you to do the same if you're even remotely interested in top-down Zelda, Tunic, or any of those types of games. I will leave a link to every game that can be purchased on PC in the description. At number 2, Crypt Custodian, my favourite Metroidvania of the year. It blends bullet hell combat, a beautiful art style, and some really fun characters to create a special experience that left me in tears. And you can play as a cat. And it would have been my game of the year, had I not had the chance to purchase a PlayStation 5 on the 26th of December. My game of the year is Astrobot. The last few days of my life have been consumed by this little guy and his little friends and his absolutely phenomenal platformers. I started with the Astro's Playroom since it was my first time with a DualShock 5 controller, and bloody hell, Team Asobi, you got the most out of this controller, it's insane! Then to see that Astrobot really is just a continuation of Playroom, but as a full-length title with unique worlds and gimmicks to play with, it is everything I could have wanted from a 3D platformer and more. There's something in the water in Japan, they just know how to make banger platformers. Astrobot is a perfect representation of what the Sony brand and the PlayStation 5 could be. A return to more exciting games for all ages. A flash of what Nintendo have been doing for years. Every world feels exciting to explore. You've got traditional courses where you make your way from point A to point B. You've got more open world levels where you need to unlock padlocks on an iron giant chained to the beach, or a starfish that needs freeing in an ocean paradise. The Christmas DLC that has you hunting for presents and making use of every power-up the game has to offer follows the same formula and is fantastic. My favourite levels, though, are those that take a concept we all know and flip them on their head. Downsize Surprise takes the idea of a level with a shrinking mechanic and integrates it seamlessly into the gameplay. No portals to switch from big to small like Mario 64, no loading screens, you press a button and you're tiny, and the level of detail and the amount of fun interactions that come from this simple change is insane. How about the bot levels, where you get to play with the powers of classic Sony characters like Spike from Ape Escape or Kratos from God of War, allowing you to use their special abilities to rescue bots from their series, while also paying homage to the games they've come from. On the one hand, I wish all of the bots could get this treatment with themed worlds like Metal Gear Solid or Legacy of Kain. I was really hoping for a Fumito Ueda Shadow of the Colossus or Last Guardian special stage, but hey, we got Loco Roco, which I never saw coming. On the other hand, the sheer amount of originality and creativity that comes from not needing to stick to established IPs for each world led to so many fantastic planets to explore. I need to do a video on Astrobot next year. The mini-boss and boss encounters in each galaxy are really fun. You've got the simple end-of-level fights like the Tama Trio, where you horrifically suck out their eggy guts. But then you have epic battles against these gigantic animals who look threatening. The snake boss especially had me on edge, and I love how each of these fights has something dynamic about their progression to keep you invested, be it an arena change or just a changed up moveset. There are still so many Sony IPs yet to be shown in Astrobot. Future DLCs feel like a certainty at this point, and if there is anyone at Team Asobi watching, we need an Akuji the Heartless bot from Crystal Dynamics and a Wild 9 bot. I will take no further comments, they deserve to be in this game. The music is out of this world. Astrobot has his own theme song that's been stuck in my head for days now. The Secret Galaxy, where it's the same tune as every other galaxy, but you'll randomly hear "Secret" in the background, is so catchy. And the various callbacks to the OST of Astro's Playroom and Astro's Rescue had me smiling like a giddy child. You just know when you hear SSD in music tracks, you're in for a good time. How about the level with the giant tree that sings throughout with some of the most fire lyrics that I can barely understand? His vibes are that immaculate. But my favorite track is 12 Bar Bot Funfair Remix, which you're listening to right now. It's giving Parappa the Rapper, it's giving a funky dance revolution, it's giving get up and dance. If your toe isn't tapping right now, you are not human. But what makes Astrobot my favourite game of the year, beyond the fact that it's the best PS5 exclusive on the market, is that it's just pure fun. It's an IP that is truly beginning to establish itself, reiterating on its previous games from a gameplay, graphical, and musical standpoint to create something genuinely special. This is the culmination of a lot of years of hard work, and reminds me so much of the magic that Nintendo platformers have. You'll see a lot of, this is the closest game to come to Mario standards from people that play Astrobot, but you know what? Fuck that, this game has surpassed Mario's standards. I prefer it to 64, I prefer it to Sunshine, I prefer it to 3D World, and I think it's more replayable than Odyssey. I think it stands on that pedestal with the Super Mario Galaxy games and pays tribute to Sony's vast IP library in such a respectful way. And to be very blunt, it has better boss fights than the Mario games, and I don't think that's a hot take. I can only hope that the success of Astrobot leads to more old IP from Sony resurging, and more companies being willing to make these family-friendly games that appeal to everyone regardless of age. Not every game on a console needs to be this story-driven narrative graphical juggernaut. Sometimes we just want a funky as fuck platformer with a cute little guy who you can market the fuck out with plushies and keychains, and who you can dress up in a cute little reindeer costume. The only thing I will say I was very disappointed by, no Klonoa outfit. Come on, that was such a missed opportunity for the furries. Astrobot, you are my game of the year for 2024, and I'm already thinking about jumping back in for a second playthrough. And that's the last video of 2024. Thank you so much for all your support across this very complicated year for me. Next time in 2025, we've got Elden Ring Night Reign coming up. We're 30,000 subscribers strong, and I'm really looking forward to what comes next. Maybe I'll start streaming again. So be sure to parry that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all of my future videos. A massive shout out to my YouTube channel members for supporting me for another month. You guys are amazing, thank you so much. And if you want to become a YouTube channel member, it is $4.99. You get early access to certain videos in the future, you get a shout out in the description and at the end of videos as well, and my undying gratitude. And if you want to follow me, check out my Blue Sky. It is the perfect place to go. It's active, it's fun, it's chill. I'm really happy there, and yeah, that's it. I'll see you guys in 2025. Happy New Year from Billy S. It's time for me to go. Adios.